This is the first of 3 videos in which I will take you through some of the most striking pieces of evidence demonstrating why nutrition matters for our health. Hi there, welcome back to the channel, or if this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Mario, and on this channel we are talking about all things nutrition and health. So let's dive right into it. What kind of evidence do we have that shows that what we eat really matters for our health? To me, too often the discussion around nutrition and health focuses only on what we should not eat. What is the message you're getting from most diet books or from nutrition videos here on YouTube? Very often it's eat less calories, eat less carbs, eat less fat. Fructose is toxic, saturated fat causes heart disease. I do think that it's important to be aware of potentially negative health effects of some foods or food components, and we'll discuss some of these for sure here on this channel. But in general, I'd like to cultivate much more of a positive attitude towards food and eating. I really do think we have this backwards, and that we would all do better in both body and mind if we focused more on all the wonderful ways in which food nourishes us and enables our body to function optimally. I really find that it helps me eat better and be a lot happier if I cultivate an appreciation for food rather than seeing foods mostly as risk factors and every meal as a minefield. So in this video, which is the first in a mini-series of 3 on why nutrition matters, I will illustrate how important it is to focus on eating nutrient-rich, nourishing foods by showing you some data illustrating how common micronutrient deficiencies are still all over the world. I'd like to start this mini-series of why nutrition matters with micronutrient deficiencies because these are the most obvious health issues directly linked to what we eat. As you probably know, we need a bunch of vitamins, minerals and trace elements because our bodies cannot produce them. If our diet is chronically low in any one of these essential micronutrients, we develop a deficiency. Now, many of you may assume that the issue of micronutrient deficiencies is mostly theoretical and certainly not relevant to you. Well, that's exactly why I've made this video, because I assure you that this assumption is incorrect. In this video, I have picked 4 micronutrient deficiencies that are so common that you, no matter who you are and where you live, may be affected by one or the other in your lifetime. I certainly don't hope so and want to do my part to help you avoid them with content such as this video here, because the good news is that all of these are highly preventable. The first disease that is strongly linked to micronutrient deficiencies is a great example of this. I'd like to talk about osteoporosis, a condition mainly afflicting older women and to a lesser extent older men. Osteoporosis risk is affected by many dietary and lifestyle factors, but in this video we'll focus mostly on the role of calcium intake. We'll spend a bit more time on this one than on the other 3 conditions because I think this is a particularly compelling example of how food directly provides the very building blocks of our bodies. Osteoporosis is characterized by weak and brittle bones due to low bone mineral density. Even if you don't consider yourself an older woman or man, I encourage you to keep watching because we build up healthy and strong bones mostly before we turn 30. So your diet in your youth and in college can very well have a significant impact on whether you'll develop osteoporosis as a 70-year-old lady or gentleman. In our clinical studies, I have also seen several unsuspecting young research participants in their 20s who already had osteopenia, which you can think of as pre-osteoporosis. The way the body builds bone is actually super fascinating, and I'd like to take some time to explain this briefly, because it illustrates why the quality of our diet is so important when it comes to healthy bones. When you look at a bone, it appears solid, hard and strong. But if you looked at it through an electron microscope, what you'd see is this here. Bone has a porous, honeycomb-like structure, and the way bone is built is that the body lays down protein fibers that are a type of collagen. See down here, you can see these collagen fibers very nicely. These fibers form bundles and they become hard and strong only once minerals such as calcium and phosphorus attach to them. What is fascinating about bone is that there are specialized cells called osteoclasts that are wandering around the bone that constantly break down bone tissue, and other cells called osteoblasts that lay down new bone tissue. And that new bone tissue is laid down such that the bone becomes strong in exactly the direction that force is applied upon it. So basically, the bone senses in which direction it needs to be strong And then these cells lay down new bone tissue to provide strength exactly along that axis, similar to a construction worker placing a beam to support a ceiling. At the same time, because bones are porous, they remain quite lightweight. This entire process is highly regulated, and many hormones play a role. Given that the bone senses force applied to it, you can probably also guess that exercise is a major factor. If you jump around a lot, run or lift weights, that puts stress on the bones that forces them to grow stronger. Similar to how a muscle that is exercised becomes stronger. But this process also requires numerous essential micronutrients. These include the vitamins D and K, but particularly minerals, such as calcium. You see, without enough calcium, a bone loses its key functional characteristic, strength. Without minerals, what remains would mostly be a fibrous kind of protein. Just imagine a piece of meat, but with lots of holes in it. It wouldn't be stable and strong at all. So this hopefully makes it clear why we need to get enough calcium and all of the other essential micronutrients in our diets to help our bodies make strong bones. And we need to do so regularly because our bones are constantly being remodeled. Now, the treacherous issue with bone health is that in the short term, particularly when you're young, having low bone mineral density, low calcium intake, or poor vitamin D status would not be obvious because you'd likely not have any symptoms. Let me explain. This here is a graph showing the bone mineral density of a 30-year-old woman, measured by a so-called DEXA scan. Let's take a look at the information in this graph. The x-axis shows the age of the patient in years, and the y-axis the bone mineral density. We see an obvious categorization by bone mineral density, with the green area on top representing normal or healthy bone mineral density, the yellow area indicating low bone mineral density, and that's the condition known as osteopenia I mentioned earlier, and the red area indicating very low bone mineral density. That we would then diagnose as osteoporosis. What osteoporosis really means is that there are so few minerals, mostly calcium, attached to these collagenous fibers in our bone that the bones are weak and prone to breaking. Another thing we see here are these three lines that are sloping down with age. The middle line shows the average bone mineral density throughout the adult lifespan of a woman. The lines above and below indicate one standard deviation above and below the mean. So, what this means is that most women's bone mass will be somewhere in this range throughout their life. Not shown here is that bone mineral density usually reaches a peak around 30 years of age. Then, starting in the mid-40s to early 50s, bone mineral density declines. That decline is much more pronounced in women due to the hormonal changes associated with menopause, but it does also occur in men. What is scary here is that many women will experience osteoporosis once they cross into their 60s and 70s, even if they are within what we may consider the normal range. So the patient who was scanned here had very high bone mineral density at age 30, indicated by the square. And that is exactly where we'd ideally want to be at that age. Because if now, due to aging and hormonal changes, her bone mineral density declines over time, she still has a good chance of avoiding osteoporosis even into her 80s, 90s or beyond, as long as she regularly meets her requirements for calcium, vitamin D and other micronutrients and stays active. Sadly, many people are not getting enough of all of the micronutrients in their diet that we need for such strong bones. Let's look at calcium intakes. The RDA, or recommended dietary allowance for calcium, is 1,000 milligrams per day for middle-aged men and women. The RDA is actually higher than 1,000 milligrams per day for some groups, such as teenagers or men and women over the age of 70. For calcium, the RDA is actually set to ensure that the majority of the population has a calcium intake that is sufficient for optimal bone mineralization. How does that recommended amount compare to actual intakes? In a paper published in 2017, data on calcium intakes in different countries were visualized in this map. The dark green color shows those countries where average intakes are greater than 1,000 milligrams per day. So those are the countries where the average intake is at or at least close to the recommended amount for adults. For most countries for which we have data, average intakes are lower, in many cases a lot lower. Look at the yellow countries here. Canada, Spain, Italy and Russia with average calcium intakes of 700 to 800 milligrams per day. Brazil and Japan, in orange, are at 500 to 600 milligrams per day. Argentina, South Africa and India in burgundy have average intakes between 400 and 500 milligrams per day, and China and Indonesia in red consume on average less than 400 milligrams per day. All of these are low to very low intakes and quite concerning. Now, we need to consider these data with some skepticism because they are based on self-reported dietary intakes, which tend to be subject to underreporting. My best estimate is that actual intakes may be a bit higher, maybe by up to 20% or maybe 30%. Even if we consider that though, it's clear that calcium intakes are way too low in a very large percentage of the world population. It may not come as a surprise then to learn that osteoporosis is a major health problem all over the world. Even in the United States, where the average calcium intake is close to the RDA, approximately 10 million people had osteoporosis in 2010, and another 43 million had osteopenia, predisposing them to osteoporosis later in life. And this number is expected to grow further based on these estimates here, published in a paper in 2014. The situation is even worse elsewhere in the world. In China, where average calcium intakes are less than 400 milligrams per day, more than 50% of women older than 70 have osteoporosis, and that number increases to 68% in those older than 80. And even among men, the situation is not rosy. This massive osteoporosis prevalence is associated with a substantial burden of fractures in those that are older than 40. Data here are showing vertebral fractures, and that's a dramatic picture, particularly in those that are older than 60. Globally, the prevalence of osteoporosis among adults is around 18%, and that's among all adults, not just among the elderly. That number is 23% in women and 12% in men. Osteoporosis fractures can be a huge problem in affected people, and this is not an issue to be taken lightly. Unfortunately, I have seen this firsthand. My mom suffered from osteoporosis later in her life. In her late 60s, she fell and broke a thoracic vertebra that could not be surgically repaired because her entire spine was too brittle and weak. What followed was a year of intense daily pain in spite of pain medication, and she had trouble breathing and eating because her torso was basically compressed due to a partly missing vertebra. And all of this from one fracture. I'm sharing this because sometimes when we look at these abstract numbers of millions or percentages that are affected by a condition, it's easy to forget the actual people behind these numbers, the suffering and the day-to-day effects on the quality of life these conditions can bring. So please, take good care of your bones. Even though osteoporosis is not always or not entirely due to micronutrient deficiencies, I hope I have convinced you that this is clearly a major health issue all around the world that is largely related to the quality of our diet and lifestyle, and in most cases preventable. Okay, let's take a look at another health issue that is linked to a micronutrient deficiency: vision loss. Vision loss can have many causes, but globally a major one is vitamin A deficiency. Now, vitamin A deficiency is not primarily a problem in the United States or most other developed countries, which is partly thanks to food fortification with vitamin A. The gray line at the bottom here in this graph shows the prevalence of vitamin A deficiency in high-income countries, including the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Vitamin A deficiency affects about 10% of people in those countries, which, if you ask me, is already too high a number. However, vitamin A deficiency is a much more substantial issue in most of the rest of the world. For example, the percentage of people who are vitamin A deficient in sub-Saharan Africa in red, South Asia in dark blue, and Southeast Asia in light blue was between 60 and 80% in 2011 when the last data point was measured. 60 to 80%, that's absolutely nuts. Given that vitamin A plays a critical role in the functioning of our eyes, this comes with a substantial burden of vision loss due to vitamin A deficiency. Globally, the prevalence of vitamin A deficiency-induced vision loss is around 75 cases per 100,000 people. Red here is females, green is males, and the black line is the total. That by itself is already quite bad, but that number is substantially higher in South Asia and Central Sub-Saharan Africa, which you'll see at the bottom of this graph here. Again, the two lines here show data separately for males and females. The American Academy of Ophthalmology estimates that every year about 500,000 children experience vision loss and 1 million die as a result of vitamin A deficiency. Sobering numbers. Now let's talk briefly about hypothyroidism. That means low thyroid function. Hypothyroidism is most often due to a deficiency in the essential trace element iodine. Take a look at this table here, showing that more than a third of the general global population and also more than a third of school-aged children was estimated to be iodine deficient in 2003. The numbers are particularly alarming in Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean region, and Africa. But even in the Americas, where the prevalence is lowest, about 10% are iodine deficient. When this paper was published, it was estimated that about 2 billion people worldwide were suffering from iodine deficiency. And according to a 2017 paper that I've also cited here, this number hasn't changed substantially since. Iodine deficiency is nothing to take lightly because it can lead to a condition called hypothyroidism, meaning thyroid hormone levels that are too low. Long-term iodine deficiency can also lead to an enlargement of the thyroid called a goiter. That is because, just like calcium is a building block of bone, iodine is a building block of thyroid hormone. And without the right amounts of iodine in our diets, the thyroid gland simply cannot make enough thyroid hormone. Why is that a problem? Thyroid hormone regulates many aspects of our metabolism, acting on most cells in our body. For example, remember I said earlier when we talked about osteoporosis that bone growth and bone remodeling underlie hormonal regulation. One of these hormones is thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone also regulates the growth of nerve cells, the production of heat, and the conversion of food to energy in our bodies. Having low thyroid hormone levels will make you constantly feel tired, lethargic, and cold, and also prone to weight gain. Also, if a pregnant woman is iodine deficient, it can dramatically affect the cognitive development of her unborn child, in the worst case leading to intellectual disability. So again, this is not good, and frustrating because it's a problem that could easily be prevented on the population level by widespread use of iodized salt. And lastly, another disease that is extremely common around the world that often is caused by a lack of specific micronutrients is anemia. Anemia is a condition characterized by insufficient healthy red blood cells. Because red blood cells transport oxygen around the body, not having enough healthy red blood cells means that the blood is unable to transport all the oxygen the cells need. As a result, the patient feels tired and lethargic, dizzy and lightheaded. That may not sound like such a big deal, but in advanced stages, the patient is not able to function normally at all, and in extreme cases, the condition can even be fatal. Take a look at this map here that shows the prevalence of anemia in the world. In most of the wealthy Western countries, such as the United States, Western European countries, Canada, or Australia, between 3 and 10% of the population was anemic at the time of this study, which was 2019. That is a substantial burden already. But it's much worse if you look at other countries. For example, Russia or Brazil, it's between 10 and 25%. Or South Asia and Central Africa with rates up to 50%. Because of the regular loss of blood in menstruating girls and women prior to menopause, the prevalence tends to be about twice as high in women between the ages of 15 and about 45, shown here in this figure in red, compared to men, shown in blue. The figure shows the prevalence on the right side and absolute numbers on the left side. Just look at these numbers. What we're talking about here are tens of millions of affected people in each of these groups by age and gender. So, for example, about 80 million young women aged 15 to 19 suffer from anemia worldwide, another 80 million young women between 20 and 24 years of age, and so on. That's staggering. Now, anemia can be caused by a lot of different medical issues, such as infection or chronic kidney disease, but globally, at least 50% of all cases are due to dietary iron deficiency, shown here in orange. There are additional dietary factors that can cause anemia, including vitamin A deficiency or a deficiency in folic acid or vitamin B12. So it's clear that this is a major diet-related health problem affecting hundreds of millions of people around the world. This is by no means a complete list of common micronutrient deficiencies, but I hope that the discussion of these few examples has made it clear that micronutrient deficiencies are still a major public health problem all around the world. And let's revisit the question we asked at the beginning of this video. What kind of evidence do we have that shows that what we eat really matters for our health? I'd say we have the first answer. Good, nutrient-rich foods will provide us with all of the essential vitamins, minerals, and trace elements our body needs to function optimally, giving us a chance to have everything run smoothly, feeling fit and healthy. What I'm hoping you will take away from this video is that nutrient-dense food is the foundation of good health. And that should be the case no matter which other diet philosophies you adhere to. Whether you are vegan or follow a normal mixed diet or a low-carb or ketogenic diet, your body needs sufficient amounts of all of the essential micronutrients. I have plans for a couple of videos about the nutrient density of foods and how to make sure we are regularly getting enough of all of the essential micronutrients. These videos should post in 3-4 weeks. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and click the notification bell so that the YouTube overlords can alert you when these videos are up. That's it for today's video. I have left links to all publications discussed in this video in the description below, and you can also find them in a dedicated blog post on our website at nourishedbyscience.com. If you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to post them in the comment section. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you again on this channel next week when we'll continue this discussion of why nutrition matters by talking about the so-called global nutrition transition and what it teaches us about the critical role of nutrition in health and disease. Until then, take good care.